folks, welcome to another episode of Conversations with Annie and Kate. Hi, Annie.
Hey, Kate, how you going?
Nice to see you. And welcome to our lovely guest, Olympia Yarger.
Hi, Kate. Hi, Annie. It's great to be here.
It's lovely to finally chat with you, Olympia. I've been stalking you on Twitter for, I think, probably a little too long now without actually formally introducing myself. So it's great to have you here. And I'll do a quick bio for Olympia before we kick in. So Olympia is a farmer, CEO, innovator, and leader in insect farming in Australia. She founded GoTerra in 2016, which is a startup that manages food waste and basically using modular insect farms. We're going to dig into that soon, so you can tell us a lot more about it. As I said, I've been following Olympia online for quite some time now. And I know that she's a passionate social impact founder. She's a passionate feminist. She's a little bit sweary, so I'm looking forward to this chat. Olympia, welcome to the podcast.
It's so exciting. I'm looking forward to doing my first podcast that gets to just be a great chat with two good women instead of sort of a wanky startup one where we talk mostly about what brought me here, and the answer is always the same: despair and old white men with money. But anyway,
this is literally why we started this podcast.
No, it is. That's exactly the reason why we started the podcast.
Oh, great.
We kind of got so frustrated with the same questions being asked over and over, and none of the questions that we actually wanted to talk about. Like, for example, you asked me a question before we started recording. Why is there a fan on right now, and why is my hair wafting like Beyonce or Celine Dion? It's because I'm in the menopause and my face goes really red if I don't keep it a cool temperature. Why didn't I know that more women had this problem? Because we don't have these spaces to talk.
Yeah, love it. I'm here for it all day. Well, awesome. For at least an hour.
Right, so before we go in, first important question, Kate, what are you drinking?
I am drinking a very basic red that is called Elephant in the Room.
Oh, nice.
It's a solid, cheap drop, but it's nice drinking.
Very good. Oh. Olympia, how about you? Have you got any glass?
I'm on the vodka, coconut and lime, which it's my new mix. I'm going to call it.
It sounds very kind of holiday.
Yeah, it's like a splash of Hawaii or Bermagui, if you will.
Beautiful. As I'm still in the UK and it's 8:46 a.m, the hard stuff will happen after lunch. So I'm still on my good old Yorkshire Gold tea.
I still love Yorkshire Gold tea. It's only a recent discovery for me, but it's so good. We need to shout out and get them to send us some product, Annie.
Right, go and ask your first question, Kate. Go for it.
All right. I'm going to ask you what are your favorite tools? So it could be anything. It could be technology. It could be a garden tool. It could be anything. It could be something that you use to facilitate a discussion or something that you draw on a whiteboard. What's your favorite tool?
Oh, I still like to write. So I think my favorite tool is still a pen, which is sort of boring. But like because I'm back in my raise, when I'm in a raise, I have these little notebooks and I write everything down in my notebook, and then I transfer it after meetings into other things. And they become kind of really important to me. And so then when I can't find a pen, I get actually quite distressed. I get sort of fainting goat where I'm like, I can't function, got no pen. And because now we're in a world with no pens, everyone gets really weird when you're like, does anyone have a pen? And of course nobody has a pen. So actually, yeah, pen. Weird, boring. But yeah.
It's interesting.
No, it's not boring though. Because here's my other thing. So I always write things down in a notebook too. And quite a lot of the time, particularly if you're traveling a lot, I know not many of us have been traveling recently, but we'll get back to that soon enough. Or just you're out and about, you might have run out of battery. You can't get access to Wi-Fi for a particular, you've always got your notebook and your pen.
Yeah.
My handwriting is broken though. I used to have beautiful handwriting and now I can't read my chicken scratchings. I don't write enough.
Yeah. So I used to love to write, and then there was a period of time, like not so recently, where I had stopped writing, and then I got back into it when I started GoTerra and these little books thing. And I found that it actually calms me down. because you have to kind of spend a bit more time concentrating. Like you can type and not really, you can just sort of get away with it, but you have to write, you have to look when you write, and you have to look at the lines, and you have to think about what you're writing. And it actually brings my brain back to a speed that is functional.
Interesting.
It's safer than smoking.
It's true. It's true.
Hey, if your advisors are writing with pens, that's not a bad thing.
Thank you. I'll be here all week. No hope for a book deal with that kind of startup founder advice, though, really, is there?
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see. I'm sure there's plenty of other nuggets of wisdom that you're going to drop in the next 45 minutes, love. So my question for you, Olympia, if you could go back to your younger self, and it could be at any point in your past, and if you could drop one word or one set of advice on your younger self, what would that advice be?
Oh, wow, that's super interesting. It comes from the perspective of where I'm at, which is in the raise. And I think the thing that's always plagued me is like whether or not I'm good enough to do these things. And it's something I've struggled with my whole life, like too fat, not pretty enough, blah, 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 blah. And so I think I would tell her that I am enough. Yeah.
I love that. I love that. And is it something that you still struggle with? Or
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, these are the dark scars of family that don't go away, right? Like, and I think we don't put enough effort into thinking about the narratives that are ingrained early and that then end up informing our imposter syndrome as founders or in our own stuff. Like, why do I always worry if people think that I've said something smart or funny or, you know, like that I'm credible? And they always come back to that problem of maybe you aren't good enough to have an opinion about this thing. And then you add the vagina to it and it's sort of like, well, as a woman, should you even be commenting or, whatever. So, yeah, I think so.
Interesting. So let's go ask the basic question first, which is, how the heck did you end up in, sort of insect farming? Where the chuff did that come from? Yeah. Have you always been in farming? I'm that fascinated by all of this.
Yeah. No, I wanted to be a farmer for a really long time, and I started off in sheep and cows, and sad tale of a girl from the city trying to be in the bush. And, the us versus themism that we still see today between city and bush was even more prevalent then and difficult to overcome. And so I was kind of fortunate because I'd gone to boarding school, so my friends were on farms, so I'd had some experience on weekends and stuff with farming.
Can we just backtrack a minute? Yeah. So you're a city girl who wanted to be a farmer.
Yeah. Oh. Canberra. Not really a city, but city enough, right? Like not a farm.
City by country folks standard.
By every measure, right? And so, I went to boarding school and so got to be on farms, and you could sort of leverage that a little bit. And then did my wool classing certificate and a whole bunch of other TAFE courses and worked for the Department of Ag. And then ended up in the US and married a man who was beautiful, and I decided to stay in America. And that made it difficult to stay in ag because he was in the military and doing military things, aka going to war, and I was stuck in the most horrific of military towns in the Bible Belt of America and unable to sort of, be with sheep or cows or things like that. And so the whole statement, the undercurrent of our relationship was, when this is over, we go home, go back to farming. And so in 2014, we came back and I go back to farming, and it's like, you're too old. You haven't been on a farm for years. Like, what are you going to do here? So it's like, well, we'll start our own farm. But the landscape for buying into agriculture in Australia is just insane. Like, you need 50% equity to buy a working farm. And so it was like trying to find a way to do something smaller or a market garden or something that fit with our financial model that brought me to insects. So I was trying to offset the cost of feed, which is 70% of all farming production costs, and found insects. And I was like, oh, I'll just make maggots and feed them to these free range chickens that I'm going to have. And then I tried to farm maggots. I'm like, oh, maggots are really hard to farm, which nobody gives any credit to that, because we all have maggots in our lives at some point or another during the summer. And it feels like that shouldn't be a difficult thing to do, but to put maggots in a box and make them do their thing in real time is actually really hard. And so then I just got fixated on that, because, and it's interesting, right? Because it didn't matter what kind of farming, I just wanted to farm. And even now that I'm the CEO of GoTerra, and GoTerra is big enough that I don't have to be a hands-on CEO anymore. Like in the beginning, I was like, hands in the maggots, but now I still have to be on the floor at least once a week, because that's the bit that I love.
What I want to understand is, what's the challenging bit of maggots? Is it doing it at scale that's the problem?
Well, what makes a fly mate?
Oh, so it's you start right there.
And where do they mate, right? And then I'm using this species of fly that is like super good for farming and great for managing food waste, but actually has a little bit more challenge in the mating side of things. So a housefly or a bush fly will mate under a candlelight, and a black soldier fly is like, oh, no, needs a little bit more of a mix of the UV, like you're a little off there, and I won't do anything. And so they just hang out and don't mate at all. And then you're just like staring at them, willing them to fuck, and they won't. And you're just like, how is my life now predicated on like the sexual activities of a fly? How did I get here? What's going on?
That is quite a moment, isn't it?
Thanks for that. Very visual.
I'm willing you to get it on. Come on.
And it's as desperate as it sounds. Like, imagine me in my garage. It's hot, it's summer, and I'm like staring through the plastic. And I had the funniest part about that time was I had these little plastic dome things that you can get at Bunnings, and I duct taped them to the bottom of these tubs, and they were like greenhouses. But to get in there without the flies escaping, I'd like sewn this T-shirt on the front, because I looked at all the videos and YouTubes of all these fancy European fly farms, and they had this sock on the front. And so I was like, oh, I'll just use a T-shirt because that's enough of a sock. But I got to the point where I'd put my head through the head part and my arms through the arm part, and I'd be inside this stupid plastic dome. And my husband would walk in and be like, do you want dinner? No, it doesn't look like you want dinner. Like, I'm coming, like I'm stuck in there, and I'm like inside this T-shirt the reverse way, staring at flies and futzing with things and trying to figure out why things wouldn't work. So it's way harder than it looks. And then the inherent nature of like Canberra's got really hot summers, really cold winters, and so how do you even try to create a climate controlled environment when you're in the garage stages of a startup, right? Which would be the same as like create Boston Dynamics dog robot in your garage. Like, that's not what happened, right? It was much more incremental, and so really difficult to create the environmental precision needed to get the fly sex to start.
I've never thought about fly sex before.
Yeah, no, and now you won't stop. You're welcome. This is my gift.
Thank you.
Do what I can. I do what I can. Yeah.
So how did you solve for that, and have you got a much more sophisticated way of doing it now? Or are you just with the T-shirt sock?
No, the T-shirt sock went the way of the tip in 2018, shortly after our first funding round. Thank you, Grok Ventures. We are definitely, basically it's like these little aha moments that happen as you go, right? So where I had the domes was against a window, and I'm like, oh, that's enough. And there was just when they were starting to understand lighting, but you have to remember, like, the Australian strain hadn't been domesticated at all, and the European strain and the Asian strain, or the Chinese strain at least, and the North American strain had been domesticated for decades. And so they were responding to light And then you try those light mixers in Australia, and our flies are like, what is disco madness is this? Like, they just weren't responding at all. I'm like, I read the literature. You're supposed to fuck like right now. And they're like, no, this is odd. It's blue in here, but thank you. It's just like really weird. And then one day, it was just coming into the second summer of me starting to do this in 2015. And we had this really hot day, and the light hit that window, and they all just started banging into each other and dropping to the ground. So that's how they mate. They like find each other in the air, and then they like fall down to the ground. They're mating. And I was like, oh, it wasn't like intense enough, right? And so then we had them outside, and then we're trying different intensities. And then after a while, once you realize what it looked like when it was right, that was the only clue you needed, then you could try different things to like get there, right? So you're like, okay, it's intensity and the light mix and so, and then temperature of the day. And so then you could sort of try and get that to happen. So you just need one little thing that goes, oh, that's what right looks like. And then you can try and replicate it. But when you don't know what right looks like, you kind of just sort of futzing around in the dark. And
but
so
it's such an Aussie experience too, where the global literature just doesn't apply here.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And even now, you know, we do things, and our European and North American counterparts will be like, oh, you just do this. And I'm like, all right. Like,
come here and watch.
Yeah, I'll send you some of my people, and they'll break your heart just like they've broken mine. So yeah, it's nice to continue the Aussie adversity thing. The battler. Good to be a farmer, a maggot farmer no less, and still a bloody battler.
So I have another follow-up question. So who are your customers?
Well, and it's interesting. So our customers are anyone who creates waste and any food waste, and anyone who manages food waste. And so we do cross the customer segment from B2B, B2C, and we also, and then government and enterprise. And so it's interesting when you think about how we're going to exist in the world and what our customers will be like moving forward. That does actually depend on the socioeconomic demographic that we're supporting, because regional and rural tend to not have a lot of waste management capabilities, not have a lot of waste management companies. And so you tend to deal with the customers individually. And then obviously metros, there's a lot more support around there. And so you tend to deal with the government or the waste management providers. Currently, our clients are, Suez, Cleanaway, Woolworths, hospitals, hotels, restaurants, schools, those sorts of things.
It's a massive market, isn't it? Massive.
Trillion. Although you're not allowed to say that, because as soon as you say trillion TAM, all the investors go, oh. But yes, $1 trillion market TAM.
So I'm going to kind of go off piste a little bit, because I think it's important to know, I want to learn more about you and what makes you tick. And so when you were, when you were younger, did you always, you've always had this thing of you wanted to be a farmer, but did you ever think, oh, I'm going to be a business owner, I'm going to go out there and change the world and make it a better place? And, was social impact also important to you as well?
I first started caring about the environment with all of the Bob Hawke school stuff that was out in the 80s. So there was lots of documentaries, and, they were really horrific and caused my first panic attack in year 8, like landslides and greenhouse gases and global, it was greenhouse, the greenhouse effect and all of those things. When I thought about farming, I had a really banal vision of what I wanted. I was going to wear flannelettes. I was going to have a sheep farm. There'd be a 4-wheel motorbike and horses, some kelpies. And although not entirely expressed, likely to marry some long-faced dude named Brendan. And we'd live out back of nowhere, and we'd have a swag of kids. I wanted the life and the work that came. It wasn't lifestyle insofar as I wanted to not work, but I did not let myself or give myself the permission to imagine a business opportunity or myself as a businesswoman. And so I look back at that now and I'm horrified, and I want to shake that girl just a little, just quickly. But it wasn't her fault. She was a product of her time. And frankly, I give her credit for even wanting to be in a man's world, let alone, you know, imagining anything more than that. And so, yeah, I wanted to be a farmer. I wanted to sustainably farm, but that was as far as the social impact went at the time.
So what if you didn't grow up on a farm, where did you grow up, and what was your context?
I grew up in Canberra. I think anyone that grows up in Canberra has a different perspective on what good life looks like. And I know that sounds super trite, but Canberrans have this unique city that to the rest of Australia, we have one impression of. Like, you went there when you were 15, you forgot the jacket your mum told you to bring, you were cold because you forgot the damn jacket, and they took you to the fucking War Memorial and the Parliament House, so it was boring. And so and then whenever you talk about Canberra, you're like, yeah, it's cold there and it's stupid and boring, right? So like, that's most people's opinion of Canberra. But Canberra is this city that is glorious. Like, there isn't a suburb in Canberra that doesn't back onto a nature reserve. So every suburb in Canberra is less than 10 minutes walk from at least 100 hectares. You can ride a bicycle or a horse across Canberra without never hitting a road. You can agist your horse in government horse paddocks. So you can, as a poor person, you could have a horse, because the agistment for the government horse paddocks was like $100 a quarter.
I did not know that.
Yeah.
I'm now thinking, why doesn't every city have that, you know, sort of
beautiful.
I should be able to own a horse.
The problem is Canberra was planned by urban planners. So this is a city where urban planners have had free reign. They ran the place until the 80s.
Yeah. And they did a great job, frankly. You know, the Lake Burley Griffin, for all the flack that everyone gives it, you know, is this beautiful place where you can run around it, you can ride a bike around it on a bike path, you can swim your dog there, you can sail a boat there, like you can get on one of those annoying paddle boats and have a fight with your partner. Like, there's so many things to do. And because I lived there, I was more in touch with that side of the world than if I'd lived in a conventional city and my version of going outside was trips to the bush or to the park, right? Because Canberra was literally, I remember Parliament House, we used to go and chase sheep there. And so, and there's still lots of farm within the Canberra boundary. So that's where I grew up. And so I think, yeah, how beautiful is that dog? Much more connection maybe to the land than if I'd grown up in a more conventional metropolitan city, I think.
So you mentioned, you know, obviously farming is an overwhelmingly male-dominated industry. Now you're raising funding with GoTerra, which I'm going to suggest is probably also an overwhelmingly male-dominated industry. So you kind of you sort of double the problem of, you know.
It's a lovely way to put it, Annie.
It is.
But it is.
Yeah, totally.
My question for you, though, is this something that has been a theme in your life, that you deliberately go and take on really challenging things? Or is that accidental?
No, I have been known to be a contrarian, which I didn't realize was actually valued sometimes in founders by investors. But no, I'm well known to be a contrarian. In fact, it was one of the things that my schoolmates used to think was a lot of fun, was Olympia would start fights with the teachers just to make them upset. And it didn't matter what the fight was. I just picked the alternate argument. So
we can be friends. Deliberately used to do that too.
And I just loved it. You know, I remember year 7, year 8 English, and Mr. Campbell made him cry about an argument about whether or not you could live in a world without adverbs and adjectives. And he was like, you have to have adjectives. I'm like, no, you could just use a noun, you could just use descriptions, you could draw a picture, you could point. And he goes, no, how would you tell someone about a tree? And I'm like, draw a tree. And he goes, what if you couldn't draw it? I'm like, act a tree. And I just kept going until he literally slapped the blackboard with a ruler and cried and ran out. And so it's like, I think I've always wanted that's a shocking display of contrarianism. And
I mean, this is the kind of thing that now we're trying to encourage in kids is to think laterally. So to me, it reads like a lateral thinker who was, in the school system of your youth, probably underappreciated.
Yeah, I think it's definitely now when I think about that same mentality at work, it's the things that keep me going. I do find myself wanting to always fight the status quo. I don't like, and even at GoTerra when people go, no, that's not true. And I'm like, said who? Oh, well, we know. How do you know anything? We just made this up like 4 years ago. Like, what do you mean we know? Or you can't? What do you mean I can't? I drew this thing on a napkin and then breathed it into life. We can do whatever we like, And so I think I've always been kind of that way. And yes, largely unappreciated for it, because who likes a 12-year-old being that way, not as endearing. But yeah, I think I've always, and now it comes packaged up with, feminism and social justice issues and a desire to put my voice to things that matter. And so now it's targeted.
So what are the things that matter to you now? What's if you had your wish list of shit you want to improve?
Yeah.
What are those wish list things?
I think equality across ethnicity, race, and gender. I'm really excited about Gen Z because they're just going to get rid of all that shit. They're just like, what? Who cares? And I just love that about them. And I think in doing that, you actually solve for climate and a lot of the other issues, right? Those things are constructs and archetypes of our past that were designed to oppress and create class systems that have inevitably led us to the place we find ourselves in, and removing them will change that enormously, no matter where you live in the world. And so, yeah, like smashing the patriarchy, lifting up those who have been oppressed, and
how do you, this is a question for both of you, so how do you see capitalism playing into this? Because as I see it, unfettered capitalism has been the source of many of our ills as societies across the world, but obviously we're all involved in startups, we're all trying to build ventures, so we obviously like capitalism. But how can we navigate through so that we're not doing the damage that unfettered capitalism has done, especially in places like the US?
Do you want to go first, Danny?
I think there's something related to a point you just made a couple seconds ago, Olympia, which is capitalism hasn't worked because too many men at the top just want to accumulate wealth. Generation that's coming behind us isn't motivated by the same things because they've grown up in a time where they can see the destruction that's happening, and that obviously is kind of like an existential crisis. And it is, but it's their future that we're breaking. So as a result of that, you have a generation of kids and young people coming through who are motivated to want to do good, not just make money and accumulate wealth. And I think that's the balancing point that will happen, and it will happen quicker than I think a lot of people realize. And as soon as this generation of young people also get the ability to vote, as well as vote with their time and their purpose, I just think that the tipping of that will happen a lot quicker than people realize. Olympia, what do you think?
I think what we've experienced is capitalism without a conscience, and it had no conscience because nobody who could hold anyone to account had an opportunity to sit in the table, let alone stand in the room. And so whilst ever you were excluding anyone who would hold you to account or force you to act on conscience, social or otherwise, you could pretend that you were being benevolent, right? And I think that's actually where some of what we're seeing in the final, what I call days of the past, or soon to be the past, is these sorts of flare-ups of racism and misogyny and bigotry, God, where am I going? Because nobody wants that to go away. They've been very comfortable there, and they know the rules of that game, and they're afraid that if they have to make room at that table, that suddenly they won't have as big a piece of that pie or as big a seat at that table. And that's about power and control. But you can see a lot of organizations in the world who are actively and purposefully delivering on capitalism with a conscience, and it hasn't hurt their business at all. It's in fact delivered returns ad nauseum. And I think I agree with Annie that the children, the generations who are coming next, will not necessarily completely redefine it in one breath, but will change and radically improve our lives, because they aren't governed by the constructs that have made this so hard. They don't care about gender. They don't care about the use of pronouns. They don't care. Like, those things are just so non-consequential. They're not even an argument. They're just like, next, And so I think when these things are not even contested anymore by the generations of our future, I think it changes entirely the way we do business and the economy of the future, right? So, yeah, capitalism without conscience, not good.
Heartily agree.
I think we're in violent agreement there.
So I've got one other question for you that's sort of related to the previous one around, sort of consistently always taking on those sort of difficult problems, or deliberately choosing to put yourself in an environment where you know that you are, sort of always going to be fighting for, whether it's funding, fighting for acceptance, fighting for opportunity. How do you keep going? What keeps motivating you to do those things? Because that is exhausting.
Yeah, I like the fight though. Like, it kind of feeds me a little bit, right? So even when I was in the US, and my husband deployed all the time, and I was in a unit whose families were always gone, and so we had all of the stuff that comes with that, and the gross social things that happen to people who live in a trauma-laden environment for extended periods of time. And I decided that I wanted to participate in making that better. And of course, you are both actively trying to help people who are like, I don't want to be helped. I don't want things to change. I don't want to speak out because it's too hard. I'm feeling too much. As well as other sides of that group who are like, please help because this sucks and I hate it and I don't want it, and all those things. And then the military, who's like, if the Marine Corps had wanted these Marines to have wives, they would have issued them, which is adorable. And you can get that on a bumper sticker if you like in Jacksonville, North Carolina. I think, what I loved was the fight. And the longer I did it for 9 years. And, by the end, when we were getting ready to leave, and one of the generals said to me, he was like, what will you do now? And I said, just find something else to fight. And I'd got to the point in doing that where I was tired and I was exhausted. And, towards the end of that last year in 2014, I was receiving up to 400 text messages a day from different people trying to solve different issues, trying to work through different things. And I had realized for the last 3 years that I wasn't going to make the massive changes that I thought I was going to make then. And I wasn't going to be able to turn the Marine Corps around or make it this vastly different place. Like, the vision I had for what it could be was never going to be realized. But I had got to the point where I was okay, and I felt my greatest value was to continue to rattle that chain and go, I know you, I see that you won't make vast differences, but while ever I'm here tapping on your window, you can't ignore me entirely. And so you can see that makes a difference. And so you that just feeds it just enough to make you go, haha, I can get him to do it again next week. And so I just like the fight. And even now with GoTerra, things have changed, right? So first it was like, get the maggots to live. Then it was like, get someone to give you money. Okay, get them more of them to live and build a robot. And now we're in this place where all of those things are true. And it's like, now be somewhere else. Now take it to other states, now take it to internationally, now get someone really cool to join your company as your COO. Like, it's the fight. I like the fight.
And so
that's probably diagnosable.
Hey, look, if you've got to have a psychopathology, that sounds like a pretty good one to have, though. Especially if you're doing a maggot-based startup.
Yeah, likely.
Has so going back to the beginning again, was this something that was sort of in your family? Yeah, that this sort of always kind of getting energy from that fight, or standing up for yourself and doing things differently. Was that something that, you know, was in your family? Was that something that you just had innately within yourself? I'm just wondering where it came from.
My family loves to fight. We're wogs after all. And they enjoy a good fight, like a good, you know, and one of the games my family used to play, which has now a game called Categories, is a game called Boy Girl. So you draw all these columns on a page, and the first two are boy and girl, and then you know, fruit, dog, cat, like whatever along on the columns, and then you turn to a neighbor and you tell them to go, and when they say stop, they tell you what letter of the alphabet they've been saying in their heads. So we're like K, and then everybody starts writing, you know, Kevin, Karen, Kenya, you know, and then the fastest to the end who says stop, and then the best part of the game happens when you argue about whether Kalamazoo is a country or a place, or, you know, and if you've made it up, then it's really just about your best argument. And that was a game that my family like loved to play, and so that was true. I also had a difficult childhood, and my family was fairly broken, and so we fought a lot, fought for agency, fought for the right to be heard, fought for the right to be valued. And so when you have to fight for those things, when you feel like you're not getting what you need, you learn very quickly to argue for yourself, or to argue to get what you think you need, or to even argue just so that as a deflection. And so back then, I don't think it was a very controlled or understood thing. You just did it as a self-defense mechanism, or as a vehicle to get what you needed. But it's useful now. Took a bit of therapy to sort of turn it into something useful, but
that's interesting. So how, when did you realize that therapy might help?
Yeah, so my son died in 1996. He drowned. He was 2.5, and I spent a significant portion of the next decade looking for some solutions in various different coloured bottles. There was none, unfortunately, but I did give it a red hot go. And sort of towards the end of that, I realised that it wasn't a sustainable way of continuing in the world. And I started to look at, you know, mindfulness. And I first started with mindfulness, and I met a phenomenal mindfulness coach called Jen Johnson in a coffee shop in the middle of North Carolina. And I can still hear her voice in my head. We're fabulous friends, and learned through her, and then started seeing another grief and trauma counsellor called Marion, who we're also still very good friends. And then just lots and lots of time with those two people trying to figure out how you take the stuff that is sort of cracked and broken you and sort of misshapen some spaces, and make those things actually sort of weapons and tools that you can use, and strengths. Because I think a lot of the time, my current sort of life coach, if you will, says to me that your trauma can easily become a trophy. And I realize that sometimes you do that, right? Like, this little broken part of me is the reason why I am insert here, right? And so it's like, this little thing about my family is the reason why I'm so defensive all the time. And then you just shove that trophy in everyone's face all the time, so that they can't ask you to be better, or you don't get challenged to be, you know, do a better job of whatever you're not doing. And so, yeah, trying to sort of work on that, then that became such an interesting challenge, because it's like, oh, Now I can't stop being mindful of the mindfulness. And I'm so very mindful of mindfuling my mindfulness that I am overthinking the mindfulness, and I can't even just have a moment in time because I'm mindful of the mindfulness. And so you're like, how do you balance knowing with compassion, and then like, it's all right to be a dick sometimes, because sometimes things aren't great and you can be shitty about that. And so, yeah, it's been fun to get through that. And that's, I think I'm most proud that I can be really self-reflective now. And that's actually something I enjoy. Like, you know, oh, what did you get wrong there? What would you do better? Like, that's kind of become something fun to play around with. Yeah.
I think the important part there as well is, again, you know, we don't talk enough about therapy because it's sort of seen as this, you're broken, therefore you don't talk about it because you don't want to let people know that things aren't brilliant. But what we talk about, the importance of being fit and healthy and strong and looking after our bodies, why we don't have the same openness about talking about looking after our brain and our well-being.
I blame the British.
Oh God,
yeah, what did they do?
Well, just it's this, stiff upper lip thing that is so inherent in all the Commonwealth countries, and it's so pervasive, and you can't talk about how you genuinely feel. God forbid you should talk about feelings at all. And it's kind of overlaid by the patriarchy too, because real men don't admit to feelings either. So I think there's so much that we have to fight against. That's why I'm really encouraged by stories like yours, where you can talk about it and you've taken something really tragic and difficult and added it to yourself in a really great way. It reminds me of that Japanese thing where they fix the broken things with gold.
Yeah.
It's beautiful. Guy, I think it is.
Yeah.
I can't remember what it's called, but it's a lovely idea.
But it's always been there, right? Like, if you think about it, it's an unconscious bias that we've never felt feelings before. There's just been no permission to let them be true. Like, everybody, remember, you think about the war, the two great wars, everyone's like, oh, they just came home and got on with it. To hell they did.
No, they all had drinking problems and beat their wives.
Hello, Kate. Exactly. And huge amounts of suicide, huge amounts of like social problems and difficulties, like just mental. But because nobody said it's because of the war, we could just whitewash it with this other thing. It's like, oh, they drink a bit. And it's like, a bit? Like, he's paddling backwards in a sea of liquor right now. Like, that's not a bit. And I think, we give this generation of humans and this time where we're all trying to really share these things sort of a bad rap, because it's like we have to actually overshare to get it so it's so comfortable to just go, I am not okay. And everyone go, oh, shit, do you need a day off? Are you all right? Like, what can I do? And I think those things are so important. Like, I don't know. Do you guys talk about mental health to your friends and at co-work? And is it because you've got permission to, or because you made them?
Good question. I know we do. Kate and I have been good friends now for quite some time. And I think that helps because you can start to sort of see a pattern of behavior and check in on friends if you start to see things not quite working. I think similar to how you've described a lot of how you act out in the world, and I think Kate and I both talked about this as well on different podcasts. We've got to the age now where we don't give a fuck, and it's
zero fucks to give anymore.
I've got no time left for worrying about other people, as in
I'm
what
closer to death than I am to birth. I have zero time left for any fucks.
Is it when did you get there? When did you get, like, because I got there recently and it's liberating.
In my 40s. It was in my 40s, and I just suddenly woke up one day and was like, I have zero fucks to give.
Was it the same?
Mine was a lot younger, weirdly. I was at the top of Mount Kilimanjaro. I'd had the best, it was 10 years ago. So it was 10 years ago. So what, 35 I would have been. And I'd been so unhappy at work for the prior kind of year, actually. But I got to the top of the mountain, and instead of feeling elated and joyful and so proud of myself for having climbed to the top of the mountain, I started crying. And I had this sort of weird introspection moment of why am I upset? And it was because I knew I was going back to a job that I loathed. Like I utterly loathed it. So I gave myself a gift. I got my phone out, I texted my boss and quit. And I realized at that moment, no, it's nobody else's fault that I was in that position. It was my own. Why was I doing that to myself? Why did I deliberately keep myself in a job where I was that unhappy that should have been one of my most proudest moments of, I should have been crying with joy, not crying with absolute desolation at the idea of having to go back to work.
Yeah. It's so crazy, isn't it? Because it's like we put ourselves there and then we're like, I can't get out. And it's like, anytime you're ready.
Yeah.
This could end. Yeah.
I was talking with a friend of mine, Damana, earlier today, and she was like, how can we help more women get to this point where they don't make themselves do things that they don't like, especially work-wise? You know, a lot of women put up with a lot of stuff at work. And how can we make them feel empowered to walk out and not put up with it, to have no more fucks and just say, no, this is not good. We don't have any answers, but we're kind of tossing that question around at the moment.
It's the most difficult of questions.
I think the answer is universal basic income, but that's just me.
Oh, tell me more. So if they had money, it wouldn't matter, or?
Well, but most people stay in jobs and things that they don't like because of money. If we had a universal basic income, people could walk out the door at a moment's notice and still pay their rent, which is the main reason why they work.
Yeah.
So it would give people freedom. And this whole great resignation that's happened because of COVID would just be happening on steroids, I reckon, if there was a universal basic income so you didn't have to worry about paying the rent tomorrow.
Yeah. I think that's a super interesting one. I've sat with paternity leave for a while because I think there's still this overwhelming feeling that women are grateful for any opportunity to be at work. It's not necessarily conscious, but I think a lot of women feel that. And I've certainly seen it over the years in our hiring process, where women are like undersell themselves, apologize, and it's like, I'm sorry, don't apologize for being here. Don't just stand here and tell me why you're here and why you want to be here. Don't apologize for what you have or haven't done. Just tell me what you're going to do. I recognize that's a unique interviewer's perspective. But I think back to my own life, where most of it was couched in the constraints of my husband's job and my children's needs. And I resented both parties for that. And largely, where your ability to participate in the workforce as a woman and the kind of job you're allowed figuratively to have, is predicated on the kind of partner you have.
Well, so that seems to me to be the single biggest choice that a woman needs to make.
Yeah.
And it can make or break you.
Yeah. Right. And it doesn't matter what gender that partner is, but if you've chosen the wrong partner and they're not a supportive individual, then you will make choices based on the needs of that partner and the needs of your subsequent crotch goblins to frigging have a job that fits all of those things, right? So, I can't have a job that needs me to work late because Timmy needs to be picked up from band at 4 and whoever I'm married to or living with won't do it because their job's more important. Or do you know what I mean? Or whatever playoff you end up in. And I think there's this really odd accounting that ends up taking place. And I certainly saw that a lot with the women that I worked with in the US, and we see it every now and again in women we are looking to hire who sort of speak to us about these constraints, but it's always in the overtone of their partner, right? So it's not, I want to be at Jimmy's like, or Timmy's bloody, whatever kid we're talking about, piano, it's always, oh, I have to, because insert my spouse as a tool here. And so I think, yeah, maybe if we had universal income and paternity leave was a real thing.
Well, part of the problem is men don't want to take paternity leave because they know they get downgraded in the workplace.
For the same reason, right? Like, it's
because they get treated like a woman.
Yeah, it's so weird.
This is why the patriarchy needs to be destroyed.
Yes, we need to smash the patriarchy.
Brick by brick with a hammer.
Hey, we probably need to hit pause, Kate.
I was literally about to say this is probably a good place to end this. So thanks so much.
We leave it on the note of smash the patriarchy, brick by brick, people.
That was a really fun chat.
Thank you so much. I will just